Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all our brothers and sisters and guests. It gives me great pleasure to host this Muslim writers event, especially in the context of the fact that it is a Muslim writers event. I mean, if we look at our faith, when we look at the Quran, the very first words of the Quran were Iqra. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. And that, of course, means read. Read in the name of your Lord who created. And therefore, you would expect that a community that is based on this very important aspect of our lives, which is, of course, reading, would be the most literate religious community in the world. But sadly, at the moment, that is not the case. But today, we'll take you on a literary journey around the world through the centuries. Let's hope that we can kickstart this reading as a habit and as a passion in our communities and produce more world-class writers and poets. I'll be asking each, so there'll be 5 writers who will be, a short bio of them will be discussed, and I'll be introducing the speaker, the person who will be doing that. But before we get into the writers, I'd like to ask Dr. Jess Edward, who is the head of English at the department, the English department at MMU, to say a few words as our guest. And of course, we're delighted to have MMU as a partner of MacFest tonight.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It's a great honor to be invited by Kezra to introduce this session. Kezra's reputation precedes her, as they say, as does the reputation of MacFest. And I was really excited to meet her last year to discuss partnership between the festival and Manchester Met. When she asked me to introduce this session, I tried briefly to persuade her that I wasn't the best person to do it. I'm absolutely not an expert in the literature that we're going to be reading tonight, but I soon discovered that saying no to Kezra isn't an option. And I think the success, in many ways, of MacFest is explained by that. Somebody spoke earlier about the importance of powerful leadership in bringing off something like this festival, and they were certainly right in this case. What an amazing leader. So I'm very glad that Kezra wouldn't take a no, and so I'm here now not as an expert, but to learn, and there are 5 new books on my bookshelves. For me, this is highly symbolic of where I am on my journey as a scholar of literature. How many people are aware that Manchester is a UNESCO City of Literature? Can you put your hands up? That's a little bit better than I usually get. If you look behind me, there's a logo on the banner. Manchester City of Literature. I'm not going to explain, because it would take a little while, what it means to be a UNESCO City of Literature, but really, it's a recognition from the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, that literature is a really important part of the fabric of this city. It's at the heart of what we do here. It's not just a football city. I keep saying that. It is a football city, but it's not just a football city. Manchester Met, along with University of Manchester and the City Council, was one of the 3 partners that secured City of Literature status for Manchester and that have built and funded the organisation that will take this designation forward. And as many people have said before today, this is one of the most diverse cities on earth in terms of languages and cultures. 200 languages are spoken here, and some of the most widely spoken languages in Manchester are those of Muslim cultures. What an amazing creative resource. What richness in the culture here. What this means is that City of Literature, which lasts forever, is going to be a journey of discovery for all of us, as we learn about literary histories beyond the ones we already know. People when they talk about Manchester, will talk about it as the city of Elizabeth Gaskell, the city of Anthony Burgess, but it's about much, much more than that. Kezra said I was allowed to do a little bit of boasting on behalf of my university, a little bit of trumpet blowing. So close your ears, it's going to come now, and I'll get it over with really quickly. Manchester Met has a proud history of community engagement through literature and creative writing. 7 years ago, we started a competition called Mother Tongue, Other Tongue, which supported school children to write poetry, both in languages they were learning at school and in languages they spoke at home. 7 years later, this competition has engaged with around 40,000 school children across the UK, and there are copies of that competition in Scotland and all over the place. It's been very, very successful. And it was really nice to see Shiraz Ali here. I know Levensoom School, where Shiraz is a teacher, have participated in the competition, and that's how I've met him before. Teachers and parents of children who take part in the competition and write poetry in their mother tongue tell us that it encourages children to bring into the classroom something they often have to leave outside the door, and to see that it's a strength and a creative resource. Multilingualism is absolutely a strength and a creative resource. This year we heard that the Mother Tongue, Other Tongue competition has won one of the most prestigious prizes in UK higher education, the Queen's Anniversary Award, which we're very proud of. Mother Tongue, Other Tongue, along with the Manchester Literature Festival and the University of Manchester's Multilingual Manchester project, which you may have heard of, was one of the initiatives which we described when we wrote the bid for the city to become a city of literature, with a distinctive commitment to multiculturalism and linguistic diversity. If MacFest had been going then, it would have been one of our proudest examples. I was on the steering group convened to develop our bid, and there I met Zahid Hussain, chair of poet, novelist, teacher, and director of Manchester Muslim Writers. I don't know if anybody here knows Zahid. Anybody know Zahid Hussain? Yes, excellent. Zahid introduced me to contacts from the Circle of Literary Friends, which I think many of you will know about. And together in 2018, we staged a musharrah at Manchester Met, featuring Urdu poets from Manchester and further afield. I and many of those present had never been to a musharrah before, and it completely changed my sense of what poetry could be. It became symbolic for me of how much I have to learn and how much the people of this city have to learn from one another. Now Zahid is chair of the Board of Trustees for our newly formed City of Literature organisation as we begin this journey of discovery. In 2020, Manchester Met will open the UK's 4th dedicated poetry library, public poetry library, on the Oxford Road, as part of our new Arts and Humanities building. If you love poetry, please, please come and visit us when we open. The objective for this library is that it will feature poetry which reflects the cultures and languages of our city. It will do that to some extent from the outset, but it will be a journey. Our very first donation was a signed collection from poet Zahid Zafar, which he gave to me at our 2018 musharrah. We will be engaged in an ongoing process of consultation with writers, scholars, and members of our different language communities about the poetry which should be on our shelves. And we will ask those who come into the library to tell us what's missing. And as we learn from events like today's, our library will develop. I can promise, for instance, that if you come to the library, you'll find a copy of my beautiful edition of Nizar Qabbani's love poems in Arabic and English, which I bought in preparation for today's event. Like every good academic, I did my homework. So that's enough for me. I'll now hand back to Asad, our host for this evening's event.
Thank you, Dr. Jess Edward. So we'll kickstart our introduction to the writers. And the first writer we will have some information on now and a celebration of their work is Leila Djabali from Morocco. And if I can ask rather well-known journalist Yvonne Ridley, especially well-known because of her contacts with Afghanistan and the Taliban. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. The poem I'm going to read to you was penned by an Algerian woman And I found it rather interesting because, like me, we both ended up in prison, but unlike me, her treatment at the hands of French colonialists was far more brutal than my treatment at the hands of the Taliban. Algerian women participated courageously and actively in Algeria's liberation struggle against French colonial occupation between 1954 and 62. But sadly, their contribution has largely been neglected. However, I stumbled across this poem which somehow survived. It was written under the brutal and terrifying regime operating in one of the most notorious prisons in the Algerian capital. And it was called For My Torturer, Lieutenant D. Resistance fighter Leila Djabali wrote her poem from her cell in the Barbaroussa prison in 1957. She possibly wrote it to empower other activists and warn them also of the risks to other freedom fighters of being captured. But she also somehow puts her interrogator on the metaphorical rack, illustrating, I would say, the power of the pen. Brief as it is, this poem is brutally honest, but it also sees Leila Djabali seize back control as she reverses the roles and holds her rapist and the colonial state which employed him to account. It was quite astonishing. First, she details the abuse, bearing witness to the multiple violations of imprisonment, interrogation, torture, and rape. All of this because she dared to resist and challenge the colonial occupation of her country. Despite everything that was thrown at her, designed to shame and keep her silent, she took to words to write about the torture and rape. Instead of traumatizing her, thus ensuring her silence, Leila Djabali goes public about her treatment. And this was something that was quite shocking and surprising in that era. But not only does she use poetry, the power of the spoken word in which to do it, in doing so, she exposes a brutal occupation with an oppressive system in place to bring the occupied under its control. This isn't just a revenge piece. This also reaches into the depth of her abuser's psyche, going beyond the brutal rapist to reveal a human being, a man who has a wife, a mother, and even a child. And this sort of normality is something that I encountered just a few months ago when I was interviewing Syrian women prisoners about their experiences in the prisons under the Assad regime. And one woman told me about the brutality that she encountered every day while she was being interrogated. And each interrogation would either end in violence or rape or even both. And she told me about how during her interrogation she was interrupted by his cell phone went off. And this brutal monster who'd been abusing her suddenly morphed into a loving, doting father as he spoke to his young daughter on the phone in front of the woman who he'd just raped. And this story was all the more shocking because it suddenly hit me that these rapists also have normal lives, also have a normal facade. They also, you know, after they've done whatever they do for the regime, they go back home and sit with their family and partake in normal life, and how they can morph from monster to doting father is quite shocking, but it's something that Leila Djabali certainly recognizes and writes about in her poem. So if the French oppressors had expected to rob her of her voice and identity, then they failed miserably. Not only does she appear to have resisted the brutal interrogation, she fights back, using her pen as a weapon, proving, as I said before, that the pen is mightier than the sword. In fact, almost mocking her abuser about the normality of his domestic life, she peels back and exposes the contradictions of French colonial values and behavior. This, I would humbly submit, also exposes the most central, basic feminist demands that all men treat us women with respect, equality, and integrity. So I'm just going to read her poem. I would love to tell you a lot more about Leila. I've been trying to make contact with her. She was born in 1933, and I think that she's still alive, but unfortunately, I've so far failed in my mission. So, her poem, For My Torturer, Lieutenant D. You slapped me. No one had ever slapped me. Electric shock. And then your fist and your filthy language. I bled too much to be able to blush. All night long, a locomotive in my belly, rainbows before my eyes. It was as if I were eating my mouth, drowning my eyes. I had hands all over me and felt like smiling. Then one morning a different soldier came. You were as alike as 2 drops of blood. Your wife, Lieutenant, did she stir the sugar in your coffee? Did your mother dare to tell you that you looked well? Did you run your fingers through your kids' hair? And that was For My Torturer, Lieutenant D by Leila Djabali. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jazakallah khair, Sister Yvonne Ridley. And you had a couple of minutes left, so thank you for the good timing. Right, we move on to Syria and Nizar Qabbani, a famous writer from there. And can I ask Lord Richard-Fou'ad MacLeod to give us a brief bio on him?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for coming. Nizar Qabbani is quite famous at my side of the pond. He's well known in that part of the world. Can we start? Yeah. So he was born in Damascus on the 21st of March, 1923. His grandfather, the family had really were talented, artistic in one way or another. But being a typical Middle Eastern Asian family, art was not much the line you go. So you neglect that and you went into more teaching and law. So his father was had a school. Sorry, his grandfather had a school, but his father did poetry as well. But nobody took it seriously to that profession. He loved his mother immensely, and he loved his 2 sisters. And that was very significant in his life, because later, one of the sisters got married. Her name was Wisal. And her marriage was not with the mutual consent. I mean, Islamically, this is haram, but that was culture. And she committed suicide when she was forced to marry the person she married to. And that really dug a deep wound in his heart. And it was always obvious later with his anger against the totalitarian systems, against the symbols, about the presidents, the whole system that oppressed women, and women become one of his two cases that he always fought for. And the first one was the nation. As a teenager, he experimented with different art forms. So he loved colors, so he started painting, and then he played the lute for a while, but then he went more into poetry. In high school, he took poetry as his main hobby, and he wrote his first poem on a cruise to Rome in 1939, 15th of August, 1939. Some of this information is actually from his own website, but there's another website that's got also some of his history. So he studied law from 1941 to 1945, and within, when he was doing the studies, he actually published his first anthology. He worked as a diplomat later, from 45 to 66. As a diplomat, he worked in Egypt. The information on his website, not his website, the Syrian history website, says he worked as an ambassador in London, and it was not correct, because I've watched one of his interviews. He says I was actually a cultural attaché there. And I left this on purpose because most of us, well, all of us here is educated, and we always seek knowledge, and we always seek to know more about research, if you like. And I left this on purpose because if you leave just one source, you might get the wrong information. So if you cross-reference, you get the right ones. And I left this on purpose so I can say that and say, I made a mistake because I get to one, but as I went on, I've watched some of his interviews, and no, it's not. But he became an ambassador later, in Turkey, China, and Spain. His first marriage, and I'm sorry to break this kind of surprise to you that he had two marriages, married his cousin, two children with Hadba and Tawfiq, and Tawfiq died later in 1973, but after his divorce. He divorced his cousin, and a few years later, he married an Arabic teacher. And it's important because he loved the wordsmith. He loved it. And who can be closer to your passion more than Arabic teacher, language teacher? So he met her in one of his journeys to Baghdad when he was presenting some of his poems, and married her. Later, when they moved to Beirut, she worked for the embassy. He had two children with her, and she worked for the Iraqi embassy, and then she died during a terrorist attack on the embassy in 1981. He didn't last longer after that. Keeping in mind there was already the Israeli invasion in Beirut, so things were going mad there. When he resigned in 1966, he established his own publishing house. He didn't want to be under the mercy of anyone else, so he said, I'll have my own publishing house and I'll publish mine. And that's for a reason which we'll talk about shortly. He moved later away from Beirut to Europe. He lived between Geneva and Paris, and finally settled in London. He kept his links with the Arabic world, so he would go back to the Arabic world, and I had the pleasure of actually meeting him in person. Not in person, I was actually among the audience, because he came to my university, the American University in Beirut, in 1991, and I was in the audience listening to his poems. He's a very charismatic person, I loved him. And I loved his poem, which he influenced my own poem as well later. He published his first anthology, as I said, in his first studies, and then later on, it was part of a 34 anthology. His poem considered to be very sensual. So he would actually name parts of the body of the women, and he says, I made of them a little mountain, and I'm sitting with my throne on top of them. That was considered to be, at the time, most of the Arabic countries were really conservative, very Victorian at that point. He was considered to be very out there. But he loved the women, and some rumors has it that he was breastfed till he was 7. So he loved the women, and he would mention them. So as I say, it's almost erotic sometimes the way he talks about the women, but he loved the women. Anybody can agree. If anybody read your poem, he just loved the women immensely. He was never famous for having any series of concubines. He just loved the women. So you would think he's moving from one woman to another, like James Bond style. He was never known for that. He was in love with one woman, he loved her, but with his poems, he go all over the place. Presenting one of his poets today. Oh yes, he was also very, very critique of the Arabic regimes. He made a poem when he was still a diplomat, and he wrote a poem after the loss of Arabs in 1967, I think, and he called it hashish, khamr, alcohol, and the moon. And the moon in the poem was the presidents, the heads of the state. It says, people are praying for the moon every night. They drink alcohol, they have hashish, and basically intoxicated, and they just worship the president. That was the essence of his poem. It was the only poem, as far as I know, that was discussed in the Syrian parliament, and they were considering him to ban him, put him in jail because of that poem. He himself said in one of his interviews, I was only born as a poet in that poem. So as much as he was passionate about women, he was also passionate about how the Arabic dignity, the Muslim dignity, he never actually spoke about Islam in particular, but it was about the dignity of the nations, how they should stand up and actually fight for their will, for their lives, and for the sake of the people, rather than being happy with their palaces and leave the people to die. His poem, حبك خارطتي, جسدك خارطتي. So he says, one of these poems, that the body of his loved one is his map. I've took a few words out, as you can imagine, you think, because I don't think it's appropriate, even for me just to say it. So he said, your body is my map. The words map no longer concerns me. I am the oldest capital of sadness, and my wound is a pharaonic engraving. My pain extends like an oil patch from Beirut to China. My pain, a caravan dispatched by the caliphs of Asham to China in the 7th century of birth, and lost in dragon's mouth. Bird of my heart, my April, O sand of the sea and forest of olives, O taste of snow and taste of fire, my heathen flavor and insight. I feel scared of the unknown. Shelter me. I feel scared of the darkness. Embrace me. I feel cold. Cover me. Tell me children stories. Rest beside me. Chant to me. Since from the start of the creation, I've been searching for a homeland to my forehead, for a woman's hair that writes me on the walls that erases me. To the borders of the sun, for the woman's love to take me to the borders of the sun and throws me from a woman's lip, and she makes me like dust powdered gold. And that's as much time that I have for you today, because I have very rigid keeper here. So we'll have to skip through this. He died in London on the 30th of April in 1988, age 78, upon his request, and he was buried in Damascus. Thank you for coming and listening.
Thank you very much for your excellent time. Right, now we move to Moorish Spain, where Muslims ruled from the 7th century all the way to 1492. With Ibn Arabi, rather a famous Muslim writer. And if I can ask Sister Munira Alsusa, who's the head teacher of the Manchester Arabic School in Chorlton, to give us some details on him.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and good evening. I'm just like Dr. Jess. This is not my topic. I've done English language and literature, so it was all about Wordsworth, Keats, T.S. Eliot, and all that. So this is new for me. But I have to admit, Kisra, where is Kisra? I have the MacFest effect. What is the MacFest effect? This is something you can agree with me. It's something like when you go into your attic and you find like valuable ornaments, but they are like full of dust. And then you try clean them off. And then you realize that you have a really, really valuable ornament that you can sell for thousands of pounds. And this is exactly what happened with MacFest and the Islamic culture and art. It was deep inside, I think, of all those presenters and all those who participated today in MacFest. It's there, it's in our hearts, it's in our brains. And thank you, Kisra, for giving us this chance to take this dust off and to discover and find out more about our history, the art and culture of Islam. Thank you. So this is the MacFest effect. Ibn Arabi, I'm going to start maybe with the third slide. They are totally different people. There is Ibn Arabi and Ibn al-Arabi. So there's al-Tarif there. But before I start, I'm going to just put you in the mood of Islamic Spain. We're just going to look through the slides and just to remember those photos and those pictures one day were under the sovereignty of Muslims. On the night that I've searched my topic, Ibn Arabi, I've liked 3 or 4 pages talk about Muslims in Spain. Absolutely fascinated by the culture and by the history. And lots of people are still interested in that era and that history. Some people feel sad. It is a bit sad. But again, that shouldn't stop us all from going back and enjoy our history, that we were successful at a certain point, and we did a lot to art and culture. And I think with MacFest today, it's a great chance to go back and enjoy our achievements in the past, hoping one day we will recover and move on. Ibn Arabi, thank you. So we're still in Spain. Ibn Arabi, his full name is Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Arabi al-Hatimi al-Ta'i. I think you can recognize Hatim al-Ta'i as a very famous Arab, the one who killed the horse to feed his guests. So he is an Arab, and he lives in Andalusia. He is a scholar, a mystic, a poet, a philosopher, whose works has grown in a very influential beyond the Muslim world. Just while I was reading about Ibn Arabi, all his poems have been translated into many languages. They've been taught by non-Arab, non-Muslim, in France, in Italy. So lots of people are interested in learning about Ibn Arabi poems. And to be honest, I put a YouTube. Unfortunately, it's not working. And I would encourage everyone, just, when you have spare time, just to go and read some of his poems. Absolutely fascinating, beautiful poems. Thank you. Ibn Arabi's writings have been very influential, mainly by the Sufis. So this is what's known about him. And this is the difference between him and Ibn al-Arabi. Ibn Arabi is a poet, he's a Sufi, he's been influenced by the Sufis, while Ibn al-Arabi, with al-Tarif, he is a scholar, he's an alim who studied the Quran Kareem, hadiths, and he worked on it. So totally different people. Ibn Arabi there's a lot of controversy about him. Some people believe he was a pure Muslim, he was a good Muslim, while others gave him a bad name by accusing him of contradicting what all Muslims believe in, which is Allah is he has no parents, no children, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ. So in a way, he tried, or he was influenced by other religions that God image sometimes it appears in human being. Of course, this is shirk, and we do not believe in that as a Muslim. So there is a conflict. I don't know, to be honest, maybe we need to read more and research more about this. Some people accused him that he is a non-Muslim, and he wasn't given any credit for this. But generally speaking, he was a very good poet, and he wrote brilliant poems. And some people, some politics again, even in the olden days, some people believed that those fake information about him, it was inserted into his writings. So it wasn't the original, because some people hated Ibn Arabi there and then. They thought, okay, we're gonna just insert something in his writing to make other people hate him. So again, you know, there should be more research about this. Next one, please. So Ibn Arabi is known as Al-Sheikh al-Akbar. I think we had his photo at the first slide, just to know what I'm talking about. Just the introduction, yeah. So there is the picture of Ibn Arabi, and he is buried in Syria. Mount Qasyon, anyone familiar with that? The Syrian? And I think it's believed where Ahl al-Kahf are aware there. I don't know, but it's like a religious place, I believe. Thank you. I think we're done. That's the other one. Thank you. As I said, Ibn Arabi, he was very much in favor of all the people like Henry Corbin, who wrote about him, you know, and analyzed his poems, and the way he wrote about him, he was really, really interested in what he wrote. And again, if you're really interested in this, in poems in general, it'll be a good chance to go and have a look. So Ibn Arabi, he is a great poet. There is a question mark about his religion and his faith, so I can't decide on that, to be honest. So more research needs to be done. But as I said, unfortunately, the YouTube is not working, but I've had this quote from one of his poems, and I will leave it to you to decide whether he was a religious person or not. He says, "How can the heart travel to God when it is chained by desires?" Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Jazakallah khairs. Sister Munira, and you also had a couple of minutes left, so thank you. Okay, now we travel to Persia, or as it is called, Iran now. 8th, 9th century with Fou'ad Firdausi. And if I can ask Dr. Shahireh Sharif to give us some enlighten us about his life.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Kasra and the organizers for inviting me here today. It's always a pleasure to talk about Firdausi and Shahnameh, so thank you very much. I have a feeling I'm the last speaker, or am I not? Okay, probably second to the last. And you're probably too tired of lectures. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. In this story, I'm going to take you back to Persia over 1,000 years ago. And we want to hear a story about a man named Firdausi. Firdausi was a poet, and he is one of the most, his work is one of the most effective elements that helped Persian language to survive today. Who was he and what did he do? He was a poet, and what he did over 1,000 years ago, he started collecting all the stories, all the old stories that were present in Iran, written in languages that they were dying off. He collected all these stories. He also collected the stories from verbal sources. So anyone who knew a story from their grandparents, for example, he would travel to them and he would listen to their story and he would collect that story. Then with all the information, he collated all this information and wrote Shahnameh. Shahnameh is a complete story. It starts from creation of the world, goes to formation of plants, animals, humans, and then it goes to Iran in different centuries and through different dynasties, and it stops at around 7th century when Iran was captured by Arab Empire. So for a lot of Iranian, Shahnameh is like a history or a taste of what they had. As I said, Shahnameh was written over 1,000 years ago, but was based on the stories that were written before. So as you can appreciate it, the stories in there are quite ancient. There are characters that are quite mythical, but there are also some historical characters there. What Firdausi did, as well as writing the stories, and quite often at the end of the stories, he would appear as the writer. So we have two clear voices. We have the narrator voice, who is telling the story. By the way, I must say, all these stories are written in a poem. So you have got over 60,000 rhyming couplets, and those are how the story is delivered. Towards the end of most stories, we hear Firdausi's voice as the writer. He appears and gives advice to people. And funny enough, although the book is written over 1,000 years ago, some of the advice that he's giving is very relevant today. It's so fresh. It feels as if it was written yesterday for us today. I'm just going to read you a little bit so that you know what we are talking about. I've decided to keep the Persian poem as it is. I appreciate you, probably a lot of you are not familiar with Persian language, but listen to the sound of music, because that's one of the properties of Shahnameh. All these 60,000s, they carry a rhyme, a sort of music. There we go. انان بزرگی هر آن کو بجست نخستین بباید به خون دست شست. Which means whoever who wants to be big amongst us, the very first step is to stop or to prevent shedding blood. که در باغ کین تازه کشتی درخت که بالاش با چرخ همبر بود تنش خون خورد بار او سر بود. One of the hashtags that we have today is spread honey, not hate. And this is what Firdausi says about hate and hatred. He says, if you hate others, it's like planting a tree that is as huge as the universe, and the water has to be blood. So it needs blood to grow, and its fruit is people's head. که گیتی 3 روز است چون بنگری شده رفت و فردا نیامد هنوز نباشم ز اندیشه امروز کوش. The world is only 3 days. Yesterday has gone, has finished. Tomorrow hasn't arrived. So I'm not going to spend my today worrying about them. Quite a lot of writers and poets, particularly Persian poets who are known in the West, they have been inspired by Firdausi's work. But it's interesting that Firdausi is not well known in the Western world. Okay, that was Shahnameh, but Firdausi is not just famous for Shahnameh. Firdausi's life is very interesting and intriguing, to say the least. He was over 50 when he started collecting Shahnameh together. It took him 35 years to complete the book. We know that because he says so in the book with all the dates and everything. So in that way, it's very unusual to have that. But when he was writing his masterpiece, he was promised by King Mahmud that for every rhyming couplets that he comes with, he's gonna get a gold coin. And when he completed his book and presented the book to King Mahmud, instead of getting a gold coin for each rhyming couplets, he got a dime. Obviously, he was very upset. He goes to a public bath, and all the money that is given to him for this 35 years of solid work, he gives it out as tip to a person who's working in a public bath, indicating, this is nothing, I don't want this money. Obviously, the king is offended, and he sends his soldier to get hold of him and bring him back to the king. And Firdausi, although he's over 80 at this time, very old man, he decides to escape. So he goes from city to city in fear of his life after writing this masterpiece, which is, by the way, still is one of the world's literary masterpieces. And it holds the record of the longest epic poem written by a single poet. So he's been living in exile for quite a while, going from city to city, until end of his life is near, and he decides that he wants to die in his hometown. So he goes back. By this time, King Mahmud has had second thought and decides, hey, maybe we have changed him. So he sends the money that originally he was promised. A caravan full of gold comes to Tus, the city of Firdausi's birth, as Firdausi's body was taken out of the city. So Firdausi never sees this money. The money is given to his daughter, the only child that he's had, and his daughter refuses to accept the money. So the governor used the money and builds a bridge. This bridge is going to be used by people to cross the river. So in that way, Firdausi's work, Shahnameh, has helped. That means hurry up. What we see in front of us are graffitis on the wall. I've taken these pictures in 2013. Just to show you, Shahnameh is still center of attention, and these are the very recent graffitis on the wall. I just wanted to mention one last thing, that in 2011, we have co-founded Friends of Shahnameh, and each year we celebrate a commemoration day of Firdausi. This year, on 15th of May, we're going to go to John Ryland's library and see an old manuscript that is there, over 500 years old book. So you're welcome to join us. The place to attend it is free, but you need to book the event. So do let me have your email after this session, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shahireh. Yes, we come now to our last writer, and that is, we're going to Pakistan, India. It's about the partition time, so a bit of both, I suppose you could say. Saadat Manto. And if I can ask Shiraz Ali, who is a teacher of Urdu at Lebanon High School and Manchester University, to come and enlighten us about his life.
Assalamu alaikum, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about Saadat Hasan Manto. Thank you very much, all the organizers and their wonderful team. Saadat Hasan Manto is one of the most renowned writers of the subcontinent. He spent his life to teach and preach the high moral values of the human civilization, and he never gave up, even when he was criticized badly by his critics. Manto was a carefree young man who was not interested in the formal education and who couldn't pass his metric exam. He was interested in literature, especially English, French, and Russian. And that made him a thief of books, where he did not hesitate to steal books from the railway station bookshops. He liked Victor Hugo so much that he ended up translating his work. He did the same with Oscar Wilde and Chekhov. That inspired him to write. So at the age of 19, he wrote his first story in the context of Jallianwala Bagh massacre. That was considered as his first ever creative writing. He died in a young age of 42, but he spent his life creating some great masterpieces of literature and gave his readers with 22 collections of short stories, 5 collections of radio dramas, 3 of essays, 2 of sketches, 1 novel, 8 film scripts, 3 pretty decent jobs, many court cases on the charges of obscenity, personal fights with progressive and non-progressive writers. Manto was a literary world into himself. He had become a breaking news in Urdu fiction. He departed both Sir Sayyid's movement and the Romantic movement, and in hypocritical society, he loved to spend his time in company of bad guys, just in a search of humanity in them. No other writer has been able to destroy and ridicule what the respectable classes stand for the way Manto did. That is why I feel that Manto was the first rebel in Urdu literature. He used to call himself a rebel, a thinker, and a comrade. The milestone he has achieved at the age of 11 or 12 years, then at the age of 16 or 17 until he was 28, perhaps no other writer of Urdu fiction could come close to that. He is the only short story writer in Urdu who placed Urdu fiction at an international level. Manto's greatest contribution was to end up the division of society due to religions that segregated human beings into different categories. That's why he sympathized with those who were known as evil part of the society and those who were downtrodden. For him, humanity is above all religions, caste, and boundaries. Manto was completely shattered at the time of partition, not as a Muslim, Hindu, or Sikh, or as a speaker of Urdu, Punjabi, or Marathi, but as a great human being. Partition was a season of arson, bloodbath, kidnapping, rape, and the destruction of cities and citizens. It was like an earthquake which brought down all the moral values and human relationships in the subcontinent. Most of the short story writers that era wrote on the savagery and barbarism, such as Krishan Chandra, Rajinder Singh Bedi, Amin Nadeem Qasmi, Ismat Chughtai, Khatija Mastoor, but there is no greater chronicler of this human tragedy than Manto. If Manto stood out among the short story writers of that time, it was because of his views against the partition of the subcontinent on the basis of religion. He failed to understand how culture, civilization, art, music, dance, and architecture could be partitioned. Perhaps that is why he could write a great story like Toba Tek Singh. He smashed many idols people secretly worship, idols of their own supremacy, their religion, their sect, their way of life, to the extent they want to crush the other. Manto always had a room for the other. He also took pleasure in pointing out the virtue exists where we least expect it. In a way, he was a strong believer in the innate goodness of the human being. Today, we are on the verge of losing faith, where Manto is especially the most relevant to the situation, where society is once again plunged into sectarian and communal killings, a malaise against which Manto wrote so vibrantly, exposing the inherent greed and lust for blood concealed under seemingly pious slogans. It can rightly be claimed that the significance of Manto is increasing with every passing day. The characters used in the work of Manto are universal, as he writes about the existence, psychology, and the surroundings of a human being, and that is the very reason that he is still relevant even today and idealized by the contemporary generation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for that, Brother Shiraz Ali. And you had 4 minutes left. But well, that was the last writer. Now we do have just one more session. First of all, thank you very much to all the writers. Very, very interesting, and for myself as well. I think most of us are not familiar with the biographies and the contributions. Can you hear me now? Oh. Must have got switched off. So yes, thank you very much, Jazakallah khair, to all our contributors for enlightening us on the biographies of these famous writers. And I hope that really we can come up with many, many more writers, something that we need to be encouraging our children to do, to read plenty more. And as a teacher, I can tell you, from just listening or reading an essay, I know if this child reads or not. The best readers are always the best writers. So encourage your children to read as much as possible. Between 15 and 20 hours a week, I would personally recommend. We finish with Brother Aziz, who is a Uyghur Muslim, and he will be giving us some poetry on the unanswered call. And of course, it's very poignant, bearing in mind what's happening to our Uyghur brothers and sisters in Western China, in Xinjiang, which until 1949 was actually referred to as East Turkestan. So, Brother Aziz.
Assalamu alaikum. It's my great privilege to talk to you and introduce about the Uyghur writers. And today I'm going to introduce 2 Uyghur writers. And the first one you may aware about so it's Abdurrahim Ötkür, you may hear it or not, I don't know. Abdurrahim Ötkür, he is one of the great Uyghur writer of the last century. He's very influential, and his poem also play a political role as well. For example, you may know the Indian Prime Minister visited Kazakhstan in 2015 on 7th of July. He gives speech in Kazakhstan Nur-Sultan University, and Modi read a poem from Abdurrahim Ötkür, which is means a trace, which is about the connection between India and Central Asia. So Abdurrahim Ötkür is one of the greatest poet and also writer. He was born in 1923. And when his childhood, he studied Arabic, Persian, and Chinese as well. And he's very fluent in these languages. he worked in Urumqi during the Chinese rule before the communist arrival as an editor for the newspaper. He is one of the greatest writer for the Uyghurs. Why we say that? Because since 1949, before Chinese communist occupation, he was only Uyghur writer able to write historical novel about the Uyghurs' history, which the wars in the 1930s, 40s, and became like symbolic for the Uyghur nation to teach the Uyghur people through his literary work. And he has a very famous poem called Trace. And now I'm going to read today one of his poems, which I translated into English. His poem in Uyghur called Baharga Mushtaqliq, Desire for Spring, by Abdurrahim Ötkür. The moss in the candle flame burns itself bravely. For your beautiful face, my love, I would sacrifice myself. Once you come with a smile, the flower garden was filled with your love. Where have these days gone? Now I have become a wanderer. My hair grows long, a stick in my hand. My lightless eyes gaze down the road. If anyone met me now, they would be astonished. I want to see your beautiful face once, without placing my head at your feet. Will this suffering never end? Will this life pass in sorrow? Following Nawai's trail of misery, I see my beloved reflection in the wine. Holding a wine cup in my hand, I go from one wine shop to another. Do you know that Uyghur poetry is pretty affected Humayist style, or very close connected to Persian and Arabic poetry. And we have also Arzu Vezin, which is very classic poem. As he said, Nawai also wrote the greatest poet, and Uzbeks claims that's Uzbek poet, and Uyghurs claims as well. Nawai is 16th century's greatest poet. He wrote once a poem and also essay. Atabatul Haqaiq means the comparison and the opinion about two languages in the competition, which in 16th century Uyghur poetry literature became like if anyone able to write essays in Farsi, that will be kind of widely respected and kind of became very welcoming the Farsi. And now I stand up, no, Turkey or Uyghur Turkey also, Turkey language also no less than Farsi. We have to love our own language. So this is about Abdurrahim Ötkür. Now I'm going to read very briefly another female Uyghur writer in the modern time. She's my friend. And she's, her name is Chimengul Avud. She's a female Uyghur writer, very popular. And she was editor for Kashgar Uyghur Publishing House. I have spoken to her in summer 2015. And since then, I have no contact with her. But do you know the Chinese social app called WeChat? And in summer in 2017, I read a message in her WeChat. She wrote her shortest poem, and I read her poem, and I feel very sad. That was her farewell poem before she taken away to the Chinese concentration camp. And until now, we don't know anything about her. Like many Uyghur great writers, journalists, we estimated around more than 500 now disappeared in the Chinese camp. Now, so I'm going to read her shortest poem and my poem to dedicate her for her freedom. Okay, Chimengul Awut. She's a well-known Uyghur female poet. Her poem, her pen name is Chimankush, which means flower bird. She worked for Kashgar Uyghur Publishing House as a senior editor before she taken to the Chinese concentration camp in July 2018. What she wrote in her social media page, she has only one son. She divorced, she has a son. She actually wrote that poem before she goes away, taken away to her son. Her son was studying in inner China. She wrote, "My dear son, please don't cry. The whole world will cry for you." So my poem to her, Chimankush, a flower bird. Chimankush, a flower bird of Kashgar. The moment before the smell of hot summer went away, you were happy singing in the village. Your footprints were still fresh in the dust. So I said, I can't believe you have become a wilter flower. I can't believe you became a cage bird. I want to break the lock of that cage. I want to curse all the locks in our world. I want to burn away all evil with my rage. The fire of revenge will consume them. Your poem will soar in the blue sky where you belong, because the sky is free, unlike you. I can visit you through your narrow window when you feel sad. Chimankush, I know you were never afraid of the seasons. I know no one can cheat you. You will return one day. You will come back next spring, holding a bunch of flowers in your hand. If you don't come, the poplar trees won't blossom. The peach trees won't bloom in Beshkerem. Swallow won't fly over the city of Kashgar. 1st November 2018. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Aziz. And that kind of wraps things up for this evening. I'd like to thank all our contributors for their very enlightening contributions. And just a quick announcement regarding a Palestinian cultural event that will take place here on the 25th of January. So all of you, I hope, will be able to come and partake in that. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the evening with the spicy food and everything else. And Sister Kesra, thank you very much for everything. And you want to say something?
Well, I want to thank you for being a wonderful host, mashallah. Didn't you do a great job? Well done, everybody. Okay, I just want to say, everybody, thank you so much for sticking with us for the whole day. As you'll appreciate, it's been absolutely marvelous session. Thank you so much to all these wonderful speakers, and you've done a brilliant job, and I'm proud of you because this is what it's all about, to celebrate the writers from different countries. The thing I want to say now is, everybody, this is the end of the day, and guess what? We've got lots and lots of free food. It's a feast just for you. Please help yourself to the back. And then don't forget, tomorrow we have a big day. We have a keynote address by Professor Salim Al-Hassani, very famous international person, all about Muslim heritage. Don't miss it. Join us for Islamophobia, for history of Manchester, of Muslim settlements. Lots and lots. I can't even remember them. So will you be here tomorrow, everybody? Yes. Yes, please, please tell your friend and come. Thank you so much. Please enjoy the food. Thank you.